Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 10th of August 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the weather. I really don't want to harp on about the weather, but it's not been too good. Torrential rain, gales, a little bit of localised flooding in Devon. What am I seeing today? Well, we've got slightly blue skies in Plymouth, but we don't know how that will last. Cloudy, mizzy, drizzle reported across the rest of the country. So there we are. We'll leave it there. It's clearly summertime England 2015. Well, can you shed some light on politics? We needed probably war, I think, would be the hot topic for most of the worldwide governments.
Well, things seem to be heating up indeed. We mentioned, of course, the anniversary of Hiroshima last week. Yesterday was the 70th anniversary of Nagasaki. And there was a commemoration for that attended by Prime Minister Abe. Of course, I've highlighted the BBC article here because they described Abe as stony-faced when he was basically hassled during this commemoration ceremony by the people there over the attempted changes to Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution. Now, what's this about? Well, Article 9 is the part of the Constitution which says that, which effectively disarmed Japan. And of course, under pressure from Obama, Abe intends to replace that article, which would leave Japan open to the requirement that should there be any trouble between, for example, the United States and China, that Japan would have to intervene to support its ally. Many of the people that remember Nagasaki or were directly affected by it are pretty unhappy about this. Same goes for Hiroshima as well. And actually, Mark Anderson speaking to me last week, I don't think we covered this in the section that we actually put out, but he was saying that many of the US veterans also pretty unhappy about this development as well. So basically, nobody is happy about it, but Obama and Abe proceed in any case. But we'll see where it ends up.
Yeah, particularly pertinent with the way trouble is increasing with China in the South China Sea. Everything is to do with fear at the moment, of course, and the government particularly keen to have us all fearful of ISIL, ISIS, or Islamic State, or Al Qaeda, or Al Nusra, or any one of a host of other so-called international terrorist organisations. So the Express here winding it up.
Sheer propaganda piece, in my opinion. Warning: ISIS unveils horrifying map of countries it wants to dominate in Europe by 2020. Well, in fact, it wasn't unveiled by ISIS at all. It was actually unveiled by a BBC reporter, Andrew Hoskin, who's written a book. And this, I suspect this article is a combination of stoking up the fear and promoting Mr. Hoskin's book. So here is the map, indeed. Let's have a look at it. Apparently, ISIS is going to take over half the planet. Well, there you go. What can you say about that?
So they've got no satellites in space. They've got no dedicated communications. They're just using handheld phones, which we'll come on to in a minute. And these people are saying, well, no problem. We're going to take over a huge section of Europe and Northern Africa. Yeah,
but I think those handheld phones have a direct line to Obama. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a second, because this is Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who's the former head of the Defence Intelligence Agency, and he was speaking to the head-to-head programme, Al Jazeera's head-to-head programme, and he had this to say. So he was asked, you are basically saying that even in government, at the time you knew these groups were around, he was talking about ISIS, you saw this analysis and you were arguing against it, but who wasn't listening? And he said, well, I think the administration, and this is with regard to support for ISIS, and the questioner said, so the administration turned a blind eye to your analysis. And Flynn said, I don't know that they turned a blind eye. I think it was a decision. I think it was a willful decision. A willful decision to support an insurgency that had Salafists, Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood. And he said it was a willful decision to do what they are doing. Pretty strong words from somebody who was pretty senior within the US establishment. But let's not forget that it was only the start of July that Obama had that to say. So with the additional steps I ordered last month we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province. And of course, Anbar province in Iraq is one of the major seats of ISIS activity in Iraq, mostly Sunni. So that's a pretty stark admission. We've mentioned this a couple of times, but it absolutely supports what Michael Flynn was saying in this discussion with Al Jazeera.
Well, I think, Mike, we've got to keep saying it because, I mean, it undermines the basis for everything that we are being told in the media, but also by British intelligence services as to what the state of play is. If America and Obama are supporting the fractions that we are being told are terrorists, then something pretty remarkable is going on.
It also puts a bit of light on the map that the BBC journalist was putting in his book, because, of course, it's not ISIS, which is spreading out across those countries we're actually encouraging.
Yeah, right. The Western corporate banking dictatorship. Well, let's have a look at how some of the other press is dealing with this terrorist threat. Remember now, of course, we've seen that this is a group of terrorists that are being supported by America. But here we go. This is the Mail online. They're talking about an IS pressure cooker bomb plot. And this is against a background that the threat level for international terrorism is severe, which means an attack is highly likely. So the Mail article all around Victory in Japan Day, and it said a ring of steel for Saturday's ceremony as Met probes terror plot, and the veterans have told they've got to be able to clear security 24 hours before the start of the parade. And then the paper gets stuck in. It said military snipers are going to be posted or were posted on the rooftops. Roadblocks will be erected. Bags will be searched to protect the Queen, Prince of Wales, Prime Minister and thousands of EJ Day veterans and guests from fanatics bent on causing mayhem in Westminster. The drastic security procedures follows the discovery by intelligence chiefs that homegrown jihadis want to use an improvised explosive device to murder the Queen dignitaries and veterans. And if that's not enough, they go on to say that GCHQ will launch a mass surveillance operation of internet and phone traffic to intercept any communications which reveal the identities of members of the UK-based IS terror cell and their whereabouts on the day. So I was puzzled by this last bit because it rather indicates that they're still trying to find out who the people were. But of course, the whole article is that this bomb plot has been uncovered. So if it's been uncovered, they must know who planned it, when it was planned, who the people involved were, and how they're going to carry it out. Except as you get into the Mail article, you find that you get less and less factual information. So, were they doing something interesting? Well, we think so, because aside from the hype, the Daily Mail was being very clever in the pictorial representations. And we're going to say here that they were nudging the public mind to associate World War II national camaraderie with the current ISIS battle. So you have the snipers on the roof, we're at war, the national flag, all carefully posed, I think. And then here we've got, obviously, the Veterans Parade. So a lot of people taking their minds back to the Second World War. And then the Mail also embedded colour film clips of VJ Day in Honolulu in 1945. So you've got a complete mix of the ISIS threat with what it was like at the end of the Second World War. So interesting stuff. But let's go in a bit deeper, because the Mail on Sunday expose, it says, is proof IS threat has come to the UK. The plot shows that from their battlefields, ISIS own commanders are also directing atrocities to take place on British soil. And have a look at the sub-headline there. It says, plot is evidence of the threat posed to this country by ISIS. The plot is evidence. But GCHQ apparently saying, well, we're not too sure of the names of the people, so we don't really seem to know whether there's a plot. So what does the Mail do? Well, get the black flag in, the black advancing across Europe and North Africa, as we saw a few minutes ago. Here's the caption: Islamic State, the VJ Day plot in central London has all the hallmarks of a modern Islamist spectacular. This is Hollywood language,
yes.
Mike. This is as if this is a bit of gay fun over what's going to happen in London. We could have a nice bomb blast, and we're just ramping it up to make sure it's in the public mind. They did a nice little diagram showing a bit of the map of the city with potential bomb spots, picture of the Prime Minister, ramping it up. And here was the comment: on the day Britain commemorates the end of one long and bloody war, Islamic State terrorists hoped to begin a new one. This is all speculation, and I'm going to use the word waffle. We can keep going on this because it's quite important. What sort of thing were they saying? Well, have a look at this. The detailed and specific plot to bomb this week's victory over Japan Day celebration is the clearest and most chilling evidence yet of the threat posed to this country by the murderous extremists based in Syria and Iraq. But in that article, there was absolutely no evidence to show any such plot or how the thing was actually created. So they go on, but the plot revealed by the Mail on Sunday shows that from their battlefields, IS own commanders are also directing atrocities to take place on British soil. Absolutely no evidence for that in the article at all. Nothing. And then finally, Islamist preachers and warlords based in Raqqa, Syria, can easily speak to impressionable users in London using internet phone applications such as Skype or text chat programs such as WhatsApp. So a statement of the obvious that somebody in an overseas country can talk to somebody else in another country using a mobile phone. But apparently it's all encrypted, Mike, so the security services don't know what they're talking about, but they haven't identified the people anyway to know what they might be talking about anyway.
So how have they come up with a bomb plot out of this encrypted data that they can't read, and they don't know who's making the conversations anyway?
Well, it seems to us that the Daily Mail team have created a story out of hearsay, fiction. It's quite unbelievable. I almost don't know what to say. Encourage people to get online and look at those Daily Mail articles and check the UK column out. Have we missed something? Did the Daily Mail actually produce some evidence?
Do you think they've made it up, or do you think it's been given to them?
Probably given to them, and they've just run with it because it's easier than getting out doing any proper investigative journalism. But what did they achieve? Well, that's pretty easy to see, because if you have a look online at the end of the article that I've just shown you, we say that having wound up the hate with a spun story, the Daily Mail then promotes the hate posts without moderation. So it says none of these posts have been moderated. And as you read through, you can see the hate coming up to the surface. Watched a news program earlier about a young girl ruthlessly murdered by a mob of men in Afghanistan for being female. So what's new? Country going to whatever by the day, windbag politicians, well done Daily Mail, posting dangerous material. So it goes on, and it goes on. It's all about they destroying our country. So people clearly being wound up by this propaganda based not on fact, not on evidence, but on a spun story. It's pretty dangerous stuff. Also embedded was an interview with Met boss Bernard Hogan-Howe. This was an LBC interview. It was against the statistics that since September 2001, there's been 2,877 terrorism-related arrests in Britain. What did they do in the interview? Well, it was nicely lined up because the key question was that a Dave in Newcastle says, since the Tunisia attack, could London face a similar attack here? To which Met boss Hogan-Howe says, if we have these exercises in public, we can worry them. He's talking about the public. Equally, we can alert them to risks there. So either way, what's actually going on by the Met Police running these exercises is that they are creating fear in the mind of the public, either fear by the exercise or fear because it makes the public think something nasty is going to happen. And then what does he go on to say? Well, he says, over the last year, we've interrupted about 5 different operations. There's previously been 1 so-called terrorist operation a year. But when he's asked, well, what was that operation? He doesn't actually say. There's no substance to it. So we say unbelievable propaganda coming through the mainstream press. Take your point, Mike. Is this created by the Daily Mail, or is somebody, the government, feeding this information to the Daily Mail? Well, we're not the only ones starting to question this stuff. Have a look at Middle East Eye, The Circus, how British intelligence primed both sides of the terror war. And amongst other content, it's talking about Jihadi John being able to join IS for one simple reason, that Britain's loudest extremists have been groomed by our own security services. It's coming to the surface, I think,
yes,
Mike, bit by bit by bit. But here in Britain, it's quite clear that the British government is involved in very dirty overseas dealing with so-called terrorist units. And who's driving it? Well, according to that article, Middle East Eye is being driven by British security services themselves. Well, at home, what is the government intent on? It's closing down free speech. And on Friday, we alerted people to the fact that Our Place, Our Base, a local web-based news company, was being taken to court by Plymouth City Council. We said that this was clear the state versus free speech. And what was it to do with? Well, it was, according to Plymouth City Council, following arrests and a community protection notice for malicious communication. Well, we attended the court case, 2 p.m, Plymouth Magistrates Court, as did many other people. And what we witnessed were Plymouth City Council legal team clearly unsure of the CPN law, and they described it as evolving. And it was clear from the repeated checks on their law books that Plymouth City Council's legal team extremely unsure of what they were actually doing. But the good news was that D. Gibson and his company OPOB were granted the right to appeal the CPN closure. Remember, they've had their whole business closed down, all of their news reporting closed down, and the council suddenly backed out of charges against Rachel Gibson. So those were simply dropped. Costs were awarded, but I think there's going to be more on that in due course. But this was fascinating. There was a reporter from the local paper, the Plymouth Herald, in court, and he stated he was not interested in hearing the basis of the case from members of the public. He said he was only there to report on what happened in court. This was of great interest to us because, of course, we know that the basis for this case is a cover-up by Plymouth City Council to do with incorrect procedures over serious matters, including sexual abuse. So more will be reported on this in due course, but be under no illusions that the British state down to local authority level is now trying to close down free media, freedom of expression.
Somebody in the chat box echoing a point that Patrick Henningsen made to me on Skype last night, which is it's very much like ATVOD, the way that this is being done, a piece of legislation being drifted into a different direction that it was never really intended for.
Yeah. And key to it, we are going to be reporting in more detail on this, but key to it is that the community protection notice that was used is area specific. You are creating a problem amongst the community in a particular area. What Plymouth City Council has actually done is said, right, well, we closed down the whole lot. The last local authority to try this sort of trick was Staffordshire, where Staffordshire Social Services, or their legal team, was trying to close down reporting over the whole of the worldwide web, to the extent that the judge, who was Judge Mumby, simply laughed at them and said, are you seriously saying I'm going to put an injunction on the whole of the World Wide Web? But the arrogance to see a local council use public money to suppress free speech in order to cover up wrongdoing. Breathtaking.
Yeah.
Leads us on to Chris Spivey, I think, Mike.
Yes, Chris Spivey will be joining Ian Crane this evening live at 7:30 p.m. for Humanity versus Insanity to talk about what's going on with him. And at 9 p.m, Ian will be back with Fracking Nightmare, and he will be discussing water quality tonight. But Chris Spivey on Humanity versus Insanity starting at 7:30 p.m. tonight.
Yeah.
Other announcements. Unfortunately, we are going to have to. Well, in fact, I've already put the towel on the beach.
I'm glad you told me it was a towel, Mike, because for a moment I thought perhaps that was a new ISIS flag of some description stretched out on the beach in Brighton, maybe.
No, even though it is becoming illegal now to put your towel on the beach if you're not going to turn up just yet, it is already there. So 17th to the 28th of August, I'm afraid UK Column News will not be transmitting. We will be back the following Monday, which I believe is the 31st. And the other thing to mention is that there'll be no news programme tomorrow, unfortunately, because we are out and about. But some good news. Doomwatch returns, finally, in September. So Season 2 of Doomwatch, so 57 episodes in the first series of Doomwatch. Doomwatch comes back in September, and Alex is raring to go. And I believe he will have many more guests in with him in the studio, so it's going to be an interesting series.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to that. Back on the subject of propaganda, and what better place to go than the BBC? This was pointed out to me over the weekend that if you went on YouTube, there was a very interesting film clip of it is the BBC Panorama, and what the person was pointing out to us is, if you have a look at this clip, London under attack, it was effectively predicting the 7/7 bombings. And we were fascinated that in the opening screenshot, this is what Panorama has to say. The events in this programme are fictional, everything else is fact. So what does this actually mean, Mike? I did ask you earlier on, but it's a pretty interesting one. It's fact or fiction, or is it that fiction equals fact? BBC nudging terrorist fears into the public mind? Just who knows what's going on? But very dangerous programming. It's a docudrama. It's fictional, but apparently everything else is fact. And what did they predict? An attack which then happened on the show was one of the senior people who just happened to be conducting the exercise during which the 7/7 bombings went off. So a year earlier, BBC fictional item predicts something that actually took place. Remarkable.
In the same way that they predicted Building 7 falling on September 11th, of course.
Yeah, I just added the dates to the slide there. So basically, the Panorama went out on May the 16th, 2004, 7/7 a year later. Have a look at it. Just remarkable how that could possibly happen.
Well, the propaganda isn't just restricted. We'll come back on to British propaganda in a second, but it's not just restricted to Britain, because although we have highlighted the activities of BBC Media Action, it's not just the BBC that's up to it, because here we have the Lithuanian Embassy of the United States talking about exactly this. They are spending $500,000 to promote what they're calling innovative journalism. So this is in order to counter Russian messaging. And it's coming from the US State Department. $500,000 grant to a non-profit that offers a journalism training program for what they're calling credible reporting on the Baltic states. So investigative journalism training to counter Russian messaging in the Baltics, and it's going to be brilliant, I'm quite sure.
I think they need to get in touch with BBC Media Action, Mike, because they seem to be the people for propaganda, counter-propaganda. And don't forget, it's a charity. That's the best bit. Well, BBC Media Action. Yeah,
right. So this money is going to a non-profit. They haven't stated who that is. Perhaps it is BBC Media Action. We'll see. But let's get back to the British propaganda, because foreigners are charging NHS for care in their own country, apparently. And what's this about? Well, basically, it's NHS health cards. and basically you can apply for an NHS health card if you're travelling abroad, and that will cover the cost of any medical treatment that you need while you're abroad. So you basically got to pay for it and then reclaim it when you come back. And what the Mail is propagandising here is that, of course, foreigners, those nasty foreigners, are coming to Britain, getting their NHS card, and then going back to their own country to get medical treatment. Well, perhaps if the NHS was in a little better state, they wouldn't be doing that. But aside from that, who is giving them the cards?
Well, this is the thing. Everything is coming out of this country. The decision as to who comes into the country is a decision in Westminster. So
the decision to give them a health card is a decision from Westminster, and so on. So is it the dirty, rotten foreigners, or is it the dirty, rotten government?
I believe it's the dirty, rotten government, Mike,
Indeed.
and we'll stick with that. But I noticed that the Daily Mail's been able to set up a special investigations unit to have a look at this. They can't set up a special investigations unit to look at charges of paedophilia in the Westminster government, but when it comes to foreigners charging NHS for care in their own country, they can do it. I think something's going on.
Indeed. And well, indeed it is, because apparently we must bring the army, and this is the French calling for the British army to be brought into Calais. So what do you think of that?
Well, it's not all bad, is it, really, if we're going to get the British army into France?
But we have a defence pact. That's the same thing, isn't it?
50-year.
Yes.
Signed by David Cameron. No debate in Westminster, but of course there is little difference between the British and French army, so maybe that's part of it, is
Yes.
to get the two armies operating together.
Yeah. And the propaganda continues, because here we've got a further attack from the Mail on Jeremy Corbyn, and this time it's because they allege he defended a controversial vicar, as they call it. And this vicar had been banned from social media for sharing what were, quotes, clearly anti-Semitic material, blaming Israel for the September 11th attacks. This is the Reverend Stephen Sizer, who was banned from social media for saying what he said. And Corbyn apparently said that Sizer was under attack by pro-Israeli smear campaign because he had dared to speak out over Zionism. The article then goes on to accuse Corbyn with links to Paul Eisen, that the Mail says is a Holocaust denier, and it's really painting a picture of Corbyn that he is anti-Semitic, pro-terrorism, and so on.
They obviously don't like him, Mike.
They don't like him at all, but
No.
but there's nothing, just to give one impression of how unbalanced this article is. Halfway down the article, buried deep in the article, is a statement from a spokesperson for Corbyn's campaign that says Paul Eisen is not someone Jeremy Corbyn's office has any dealings with. Based upon what is written in the articles here, anyone can call themselves a long-time associate when in fact it's not the case. Paul Eisen clearly holds some of the most extreme views that are entirely his, and Jeremy totally opposes them and dissociates himself from them. And at the end of the article then, they say, Jonathan Arkush, President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, said, Paul Eisen is a notorious Holocaust denier, and if Jeremy Corbyn does have links with him, this would be very alarming. We should ask Mr. Corbyn to clarify the situation. So the clarification comes buried halfway down the article, and the last statement goes to the President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which leaves the impression in people's minds that Corbyn hasn't addressed this issue when in fact he has. So if you're skimming down through this article, very easy to miss the statement from Corbyn's campaign, but because the statement from the Board of Deputies of British Jews is at the end, it's not so difficult to miss that. So I think that's pretty despicable. Is it too strong a word?
No, I think that's the right word, Mike. And as we are paying more attention to the detail of press articles, the wording, the grammar, it's getting more and more obvious to see the care with which these articles are put together, care to deceive people. Where's it going to lead to? Well, probably this one shows where it's heading.
Well, this is quite an incredible story. iPolitics in Canada. Participants at Conservative events must agree to a gag order. So this is Prime Minister Stephen Harper's campaign, because they've got an election coming up. And people that want to go and attend one of his talks in the run-up to the campaign have got to agree to certain pretty draconian things. So This is a quote from the document that you've got to sign if you want your tickets. Holders of the confirmation of registration are prohibited from transmitting or aiding in transmitting any description, account, picture, or reproduction of the event. So they're not allowed to go to this event and then report on it afterwards. They're not allowed to tweet about it. They're not allowed to take photographs. They're not allowed to publish any photographs. And it goes on to say that the holder of the ticket and her belongings may be searched upon entry, and the holder consents to such searches and waives any related claims that might arise against the Conservative Fund Canada, the Electoral District Association concerned, and the facility. If the holder elects not to consent to these searches, holder will be denied entry to the facility. Well, that's probably the same in any such political event, perhaps. But when you take it as a part and parcel of the overall terms and conditions, it adds to the interest. The confirmation of registration and entry to the event is a revocable license. It may be withdrawn, admission refused, or holder expelled from the premises at any time for any reason without recourse by the holder. And the holder consents to the use by the producer of the event without compensation of the holder's image or likeness incidental to any transmission or reproduction of the event. So you're not allowed to take any photographs of him on the podium talking, or you're not allowed to tweet out any of the statements that he makes, but of course they are allowed to take images of you and make sure that they're used in any promotional material. So
has this team been trained by David Cameron's team, do you think?
Possibly.
David Cameron, of course, remember, took down all of the information from the Conservative website because he didn't want people seeing what he'd actually said before the elections. So drifted across to Canada.
So clearly they don't want any reporting other than their reporting, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Well, a very interesting little story from Neon Nettle. Very short, but we thought very pertinent and worth bringing into the news today. Jill Dando raised alarm about paedophile ring at BBC. And it's very interesting against the strange and very sad death of Jill Dando that here we've got the fact that she was actually trying to alert very senior people at the BBC about a paedophile ring. And the article states no one wanted to know when she raised concerns about the alleged ring and other sex abuse claims at the BBC. And the article also reports that Jill Dando passed a file to senior management, but oh dear, after that the trail goes cold. These files might keep popping up. They were obviously there. People spent time compiling them and putting them together. They go into senior management and hey presto, magic circle, they disappear.
There certainly seem to be some skilled illusionists around, don't there?
There do. There does. Well, let's come on to what the press is busy doing with Mr. Ted Heath. We think we've got the start of a coordinated campaign now to nudge the public into the fact that really there doesn't need to be an investigation into Heath and child abuse. So The Guardian has done big on a story that the police say that really they need a limited inquiry. They don't want a full inquiry because victims may actually suffer if they do a full inquiry, and that's going to be expensive. So they're going to get a better result if they just do a limited inquiry. That's what's coming out. So the disadvantage is the cost and the fact that the target of the investigation died in 2005, meaning there can be no trial. So we don't really want to do too much because the old boy's dead anyway. A scale-back investigation described by one police chief as the common sense approach. That's interesting, isn't it? The scale-back investigation is common sense, and it's the benefit of offering victims quicker official validation, whatever that means. And Sir Hugh Ward, former police chief, said a full criminal inquiry into Heath would waste money and do nothing for any victims. So he was former president of the Association of Chief Police Officers, a private company now closed. It can't deliver justice. He can't be prosecuted. Does this help the victims? The answer is no. So the police just do not want to go near this. They don't want to do any proper investigation because we might actually find out that Britain had a prime minister who was a paedophile, and presumably that prime minister would have been helping a lot of pro-paedophile organisations such as PI or PAL.
It does beg the question, why all these people are prepared to work to cover this up?
They're involved, Mike. There can only be one answer. The fact they are desperate to close down a proper investigation into child abuse. They are involved in some way. They didn't do their job, they helped cover up, or they were active in the abuse of children with these high establishment people. But surely that can only be the answer.
That's exactly.
Yeah. Well, have a look at this. The Times is even better because the Times headline says it all. A Prime Minister maligned in a week of wild conjecture. This is all fantasy, as they said, to try and knock down Ben Fellows recently. Never mind the child abuse. This is all just gossip and a little bit of hearsay. And to make sure it stays that way, of course, the police saying, well, we don't really want to do a proper investigation because it might cost. Do you think it would cost more than the Goddard inquiry at 17 million for the first year and a bit? Don't know. Well, here's the truth. The Mirror wins the prize on this occasion because it was Edward Heath that fixed it for Jimmy Savile to receive the OBE. And Mr. Heath apparently attended paedophile information exchange meetings, which makes the relationship with senior members of the Labour Party particularly interesting. Are these people, paedophiles, still embedded in the government in Westminster at the moment?
So if Edward Heath fixed it for Savile to receive the OBE, does that mean that Margaret Thatcher fixed it for him to receive his knighthood?
I've got to wait for the next instalment on that, Mike, but it's a very good question, isn't it? And if you're saying, well, don't worry, we get it into the courts, all will be okay. We're going to remind you of this fact that magistrates are bailing out, and according to Legal Voice, some 30 magistrates have now resigned over the charging of people for justice. We say it's government common purpose at work. You introduce bad law deliberately to victimise the weak and vulnerable, and that forces the good people to leave the professions. And if you have a look at the text in this article, John Jennings, former chair of Swaleside Magistrates Court, says forcing a person to pay a healthy fee if they maintain their innocence, yet were found guilty, was a ludicrous step. Everyone has the right to come to court and state their case. You cannot impose automatic penalties for doing so. The criminal court charge is addition to any fines or other costs, including compensation orders and victim surcharges and costs. If dependents do not pay, then they risk being sent to prison. Well, what did Chris Grayling have to say in answer? This is just fascinating. He said, we're on the side of people who work hard and want to get on, and that's why these reforms will make sure that those who commit crime pay their way and contribute towards the cost of the court cases. So the matter is about justice. Here's the Tory party saying, oh, well, trust us because we're here to help all the people that work. If you work hard, you get justice, but if you haven't got a job and you're poor, you don't. And why are we particularly interested in this subject? Well, of course, in Plymouth Magistrates Court on Friday with OPOB, Our Place, Our Base, very quickly the lead magistrate was telling OPOB that they would have to pay £250 if this went ahead, and if something else went ahead, that would be another £250. So we were up to £500 before the case had even moved. Meanwhile, Plymouth City Council, of course, using a very, very expensive legal team paid for by the taxpayer in the first place. Outrageous.
Well, where's the equality of arms?
Well, there is no equality of arms, basically. If you're rich and wealthy or you're a public body, there's supposedly justice. But if you are a member of the public, there is no justice. Welcome to the police state under David Cameron. Well, it's going to get worse. I'll just hold up. This is the local government magazine. I'm sorry about the photograph. It is, of course, Sir Bob Kerslake. Lord, Dark Lord. And what is he saying? Well, he's saying that stand by because Britain is going to be broken up. He says devolution should not just be there for cities or regions with elected mayors. We're going to spread it out across the country. And if you get inside, we're on page 6 here. There's an article from Lord Heseltine. He says, "You've never had such an opportunity." And of course, Lord Heseltine opened the devolution session at the Local Government Association's annual conference by saying there were unprecedented opportunities for all local authorities to secure devolved powers. And of course, it's those devolved powers which Plymouth City Council, as just one example, is using in order to close down free speech.
So it's an opportunity. It's like you're tendering for a contract or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we are. We are moving rapidly into a British dictatorship under David Cameron. We know what to do. We must warn people, speak out, tell a friend, tell your families, but above all, do not sit and be frightened. Get out and take action. If you like what we're doing, perhaps you'd consider taking out a subscription with UK Column, or making a donation, or at least saying what else you could do to help our work. We're still very, very interested in people to write articles and indeed help with preparation of the news reports. That's it from us.
So 7:30 tonight, Chris Spivey on Humanity versus Insanity, 9 o'clock Fracking Nightmare, and we'll be back on Wednesday at 1 o'clock.
Indeed, and we're just a reminder that was a beach towel on the beach in the photograph. That was nothing to do with ISIS flags. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.